It's been 3 months since the national polls, but for Bersih, the fight for clean and fair elections is far from over. The Electoral Reforms Group is now working on the country's first People's Tribunal. KiniTV speaks to the people behind it all.
So right after the elections on 5th of May, on the very next day, on the 6th of May, the NGOs had an emergency meeting when we gathered, quite a number of groups gathered, almost 20 to 30 groups. There are already 84 organizations that have endorsed Bersih, so about 20 to 30 groups gathered, and we started planning what next. And one of the ideas was that because there were so many complaints and so many stories and allegations of fraud, we decided, let's have a People's Tribunal. And immediately a committee was formed. Both Irene and I, Gerald Joseph, and Mira Samandar are part of that committee. And we started working. We had the mandate, the go-ahead from the steering committee to start working and putting together a People's Tribunal.
Organising committee member Irene Fernandez says the need for the tribunal arose with the failure of the system.
The concept of the People's Tribunal arises when all state institutions fail. In particular, the Election Commission has failed to address the rights-based framework in an election process. And when you see mass fraud and violations of rights of the voters, then and complicity of the state in addressing these issues, then you have no other choice but Bersih as a people's movement, in order to move forward. It's now got a People's Tribunal where the people come forward.
The head of the legal team behind the tribunal, University Malaya law professor Gurdial Singh, walks us through the basics.
This, the form of the People's Tribunal in this case is going to be in the form of an inquiry. So whenever something goes wrong, usually government set up a commission of inquiry. In this case, the NGOs, the coalition of NGOs involved in free and fair elections, thought it in their interest to look at the numerous complaints that they received and to take them through a process which would, on established rules, which are akin to the normal rules that are followed by commissions, by formal commissions of inquiries, and then to ascertain and to let a panel decide based on the presentation of the evidence as to what really transpired with regard to each of the facets that for which people have expressed some disquiet.
Although the organisers accept the possibility that they might not be taken seriously by the authorities, they believe the tribunal will serve a useful purpose.
I think this is a very important development, because a lot of people may have their views about how the elections were conducted, and who was right, who was wrong, whether there are complaints of irregularities on both sides of the divide by both the opposition and, as you know, the ruling government also, the ruling party also filed something like or wanted to file something like 21 petitions. Now, so there are a lot of accusations and complaints, issues that are being raised by people from across the widest cross-section of voters as well as political parties. The best way to resolve this and to give it some kind of credence is to have a tribunal like this, where these issues are on the basis of established rules of evidence and procedure, where these issues are investigated, and an independent panel, including those who have a record of dealing with these kind of issues from overseas, make an assessment of those and come up with an actual report, so that after that, whether it's researchers, whether it's activists, whether it's the government itself, can make an assessment as to how elections, what went wrong and what ought to be done to ensure that it goes right the next time, for example.
In reference to how the courts have struck out some recent election petitions, Irene says this makes the tribunal even more crucial.
In the light of the recent decisions on the election petitions, where on ridiculous technical grounds, the the petitions were thrown off. And not only that, the costs were also tremendous. 50,000 ringgit you have to pay. It's like as though giving you a punishment for bringing this election petition to court, and that is very frustrating, because you expect the judiciary to be proactive in addressing a critical issue in the process of democracy in the country, and there seems to be a failure to address that, and therefore it becomes even much more important for us to have the People's Tribunal to ensure that at the end of the day we get really from this eminent persons serious recommendations, not only on the individual rights that have been violated or they're not able to vote, etc., but the whole framework, the whole institution that manages the election process. It needs a whole transformation or a reform, overall reform. And therefore we are also looking at the broader framework and how fraud and manipulation has been built in since independence till now, that the general elections, the 13 general elections, reveals that growth of manipulation.
To ensure they get the right people to preside over the inquiry, the organisers say they have gone to great lengths.
You know, the chairperson of the panel is Yashpal Ghai, who's really famous. And when you mention Yashpal Ghai to any human rights activists, or to the people who do know about constitutional law, they say this is a very, very good person who will be fair, who will be able to chair the panel. The other members, as you know, are from Indonesia. We've got Ramlan Surbakti, who was the former deputy chairman of the Indonesian Election Commission. And then we've got Kraisak Chunhavan, who obviously is quite well known too, and he's from Thailand, and he's the president of the ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Myanmar Caucus, and former senator, deputy leader of the Democrat Party Thailand. So 3 international members who are well known, who've got a good record. Now back home, we have 3 local members. One is Dato' Azad bin Kamaluddin, who is an advocate and a solicitor of the High Court of Malaya. And then you also have, incidentally, he was also a government officer. He was a diplomatic officer with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then, of course, Dr. Mavis Putticherry, who is well known because she's not only as an academic, but an expert on elections, Malaysian elections. And she is the former professor from the Faculty of Economics and Administration. And in fact, she was a co-editor of a book called Election and Democracy in Malaysia. And finally, Reverend Dr. Herman Shastri, who is the General Secretary of the Council of Churches.
The focus of the inquiry won't be just on voting day.
From the electoral roll to access to information, freedom of information, freedom of the press, something that Bersih has been talking about, that people need to be able to debate, how do I choose a candidate if I don't have all the information? I don't need to only rely on the internet or being able to go to a ceramah, but this should be on national radio and national television. That's really important. Then did you have all of the information?
And one of the debatable things is, for example, the concept of bribery and corruption. And if you look at the Election Commission chairperson, he says, promising people money is not bribery. Now that's something that needs public debate. And this will be issues that are brought, the concept of what free and fair elections is about.
Because he thinks it's right. He thinks it's right. So let the panel decide, right?
The organisers stress that the ultimate purpose of the People's Tribunal is to uncover and verify facts through a transparent process.
We don't know what the results will be. I mean, it may well be the results may turn out and say, look, everything was free and fair. We're prepared for anything. We're not hoping that they would reinforce what we think we already know. This is going to start from zero. We have to be very clear about that. We're going to go in there with an open mind, and then it's left up to the panel to decide. The independence of the panel is really important. There's no way that we are going to try and influence to say we need to find a particular finding. We really leave it up to them, And we've been asked, what do they say? Look, everything is okay. Maybe it's just tiny bits of problems, but everything is okay. We are willing to live with that fact too.
So based on what we've heard, the Bersih People's Tribunal won't be trying to pin the tail on the donkey. Rather, it'll be about finding out if it's a donkey in the first place. Prasad Michael, KiniTV.